We're now turning to the realm of the Aegean, where a series of cultures emerge that are pretty impressive, and they're emerging about the same time as ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. The difference here is we do not initially have writing, so we have to do a lot of interpreting based upon the visual evidence, and that often means art, that the people have left behind them. There are three main cultural groups that are important. They all come before the high civilization of the ancient Greeks that you probably all already are familiar with. The first of them, in chronological order, would be the Cycladic group. And this is based on a core region right in here in the Aegean Sea, a group of islands, and it is derived, the Cycladic word itself is derived from the Greek meaning circling, and you might be wondering, okay, what are they circling? Well, they're circling this island, which is the island of Delos, which was considered to be the sacred precinct for the very important god Apollo. This is where we'll find the core, the base of the first civilization in this region. Its style will influence everybody around it, at least in the beginning. Then there will be a shift that will take place. We'll move to the Minoans. Their base of operation will be down here on the island of Crete. But again, their high civilization, its culture, its religion, its style is going to influence the surrounding region as well. Finally, we will finish with the Mycenaeans, and they're going to be based on mainland Greece. And in fact, you can see Mycenae right here. We'll come back and find that again later. This will be the civilization that will be in place before the ancient Greek civilization we know will begin to arise. And we'll talk about the transition to that culture when we get there. Right now, let's turn to the Cycladic group and the style of art that the folks there produce. We have in our textbook figure 4.2, and that is located lower left. It is one of many, and we have hundreds and hundreds of these. These are relatively small, carved in marble from the local marble from the region, which is highly valued. Female figures. Most of them are female figures. They vary in size, usually coming in around a few inches. I'm going to say coming in around a foot on average, perhaps. There is an example scale shot for us in the upper left where an excavation is taking place, and you can see two of these figures. They were often placed in burials, at least that's what we assume. Most of them have actually not been located through careful excavations, which we'll talk about later. This example was carefully excavated, so we know that some of these figures were actually buried together. Many of them do come from burials. Others appear to have come from settlements. When we take a look at them, the first thing that you might observe is that they're highly simplified. They're very, very abstract figures. They are geometric and very simplified or schematic in their appearance. They're also very formal, frontal, and highly symmetrical. It's, for some of them, been suggested, in fact, because the symmetry is so extreme, that the artist was actually using a compass in order to get both sides of the figure exactly alike. These were produced over centuries, so we do expect some variation in style, which you will see, but they all tend to be relatively thin figures with pointy toes. You can see that over in the lower right hand side of the screen, which means that these statues could not possibly stand up. So one of their features suggests that perhaps they were made to be placed in a reclining position. If that's true, then it makes good sense that maybe they were destined for the tomb, that might have indeed been their primary purpose. Many of these figures have faces that form a triangular shape, and against the flat background of the face, you can see a nose projecting in relief coming forward towards us. I would like you to know that these figures originally had organic pigments placed on the surface, so they were painted. So they would have had a mouth, they would have had eyes. That paint has not survived, generally speaking. So today we have very pristine looking abstract figures, mostly depicting females with their hands across their tummies or their bellies. The pose of the figures and the fact that these figures have, at least many of them that we know about, were placed in burials has led observers at least to conjecture a possible interpretation for the figures. And I do, of course, need to stress the fact we don't know for sure because there is no writing that survives from this period. One of the obvious interpretations, however, because we have nude female figures, and the figures do stress the reproductive organs of the female figures, and that would be the breasts, and also it would be the pubic triangle of the female form, that these figures in some way may have dealt with reproduction or renewal or with fertility. And I'd like you just to think for a minute, what would it mean if you take a fertility figure and you put it into a grave? Is it not possible that these figures do indeed deal on some level, can't tell you what level or how, but on some level with ideas of renewal, rebirth, and fertility? Okay, again, I can't prove that because we don't have writing. However, I do have some additional information for us in some of the samples that might indeed back that up. Among the examples that I have on the screen right now, if you take a look at the ladies' bellies underneath their arms, it does look like their belly bulges a little bit. So it has been suggested that the female figures may indeed be pregnant, which of course could be a reference to new life. We have additionally, however, some stronger examples that make it pretty clear that this is probably a part of the reading of these pieces. The figure that's located on our right is in fact a figure following the same formula but with a very, very swelling belly, so I think we can get away with saying, yes, indeed, she's pregnant. But we also have occasional examples of figures that have lines across their tummies. They're clearly not pregnant, but they still have lines. What are those lines? Well, we think that they are stretch marks, the marks of flesh that would appear immediately after a woman has given birth. So indeed, there does seem to be enough information to suggest that these figures on some level deal with reproduction, with renewal, and with rebirth. That makes some sense in terms of a culture that was highly dependent upon the natural world. These are a few additional examples so you can see that we're following the same kind of formula, although obviously there's variation. And I do want you to remember they are being carved on different islands and they are being carved over time. So we do expect to have some variation among the figures. They are very, very thin with pointy toes, heads tipped back, and a nose projecting from the surface. They're created with a kind of geometric regularity, and they're very, very formal and very, very symmetrical. Of these images, the one that is located over on our right is in the Walters Museum in Baltimore, where you can get a chance to look at it. You can also find a number of these located in the Met in New York City, so there are a lot of them around that you can actually see. The one in the bottom that says Christie's 2010 is an object that I'm going to refer you to in our assignment, and I would like you to get a much closer look at this. This is also a particularly important object because, well, partly it's a good object itself and it has a provenance. That means a relatively proven history. It did come up for sale at Christie's in 2010 and it sold for a very hefty price tag. If we were in the classroom, I'd be asking you right now, how many of you like these objects and how many of you do not like these objects? Generally, what happens in a group of, let's say, 30 people, there'll be 4 to 5 people who like them, and those same 4 to 5 people also like modern art. And in fact, that seems to be connected, so much so that the growing love of modern art in the 20th century, particularly around the midpoint of the 20th century, caused these objects to be highly sought after. As a result of that, the value of them rose. And as a result of that, there were changes in the way in which these objects were acquired. And it's very important that you understand those changes. We're looking now at an example of male figures that come from our early carvers in the Cycladic island group. There aren't many male figures that are known or male figures that survive. None of the unusual figures have been documented through excavation. That means that they've just appeared on the art market, which makes it very, very hard to trace them in terms of authenticating their original history and their authenticity. The one that's on the left, Figure 4-3, which is in our book, is located in the National Museum in Athens in Greece, and it is generally considered to be one of the finer pieces of Cycladic art and carving. It shows a male figure. The head is following the kind of tradition that we have come to expect, with the female forms kind of tilted back with a nose that sits on top of the surface in relief. The male figure is seated this time. His arms are broken off. They originally would have been there, and he would have been in the process of playing a harp. We think that that harp, which has a projection right here, might have had a bird beak as a decoration on the form of the harp. The figure is rounded. It also has geometric simplification. It is also symmetrical. It's also a pretty sophisticated design, and it incorporates what we would count as negative space. Negative space refers to the part of the design which is actually absent. By that, let's just go over here. This would be negative space. It is an empty space within the work of art. Nevertheless, it creates an interesting shape in the harp that is picked up in the legs of the chair over here, and even in the back of the chair. Those empty spaces, or negative shapes that we encounter, negative space, become an important part of the overall design. So generally speaking, we're going to say this is a pretty good work of art. The one that's next to it is located in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, so you can actually go look at this one and decide for yourself what you think of it and how you value it. This particular work is important because fairly recently, someone who worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art has questioned the authenticity of this object, claiming that it is a fake. So let me quickly return to what happens when the value of these skyrockets, and the way in which people can obtain them is to dig them up out of the earth. That means looting. As the folks who had the opportunity to do the looting did go and dig up graves and put these on the art market, what they were simultaneously doing was destroying the site. Consequently, we know very little about where these objects came from or what kind of tombs they were located in. In addition to that, it becomes increasingly difficult to authenticate these pieces to tell whether they're real or whether or not they might have been faked. In other words, carved by someone, let's say the 1960s and 1970s, who recognized how much he could sell them for and how easy they could be to reproduce using traditional tools. These objects are made out of stone. Okay, stone is old. You can't test for age, and there is no known, at least at present, known testing method to determine the age of the object. If the person who carved it, let's say it is a fake, if the person who carved it used power tools, okay, yeah, you can recognize the markings are different from the use of traditional tools. However, most of the forgeries coming out of Greece appear to have been made with traditional tools, making it incredibly difficult to be able to determine what is authentic and what is not.